From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Well, hello. I am Stephen Abrams from the California Digital Library, and welcome to the panel. I think we're going to have very interesting presentations and hopefully some now extended discussions about this topic. The way we're going to have things arranged is we're each going to give a fairly brief presentation, somewhere about, well, we were planning on 10 minutes, but I guess we can now talk a little bit slower. I'll start things off by giving somewhat of an overview about web archiving problems and opportunities. There are lots of both, unfortunately and fortunately. And then I will turn it over to Martin Klein from the Los Alamos National Laboratory, who will be talking about Memento. Jimmy Lin from the University of Maryland, who will be talking about Workbase. And then finally, Michael Nelson from Old Dominion University, who will be talking about assessing the quality of web archives. And then, as Abby said, we'll have hopefully some extended time for your questions, and hopefully we'll get some discussion and back and forth going with you. So to begin with, why web archiving? Why is this an important thing? I think certainly for all of us who are working for cultural heritage or other types of memory institutions, web archiving is merely the continuation of our long-standing mission to collect, preserve, and provide access to both the scholarly record and our common cultural patrimony. Since the web has really become the publishing platform of choice, it's where the content is, and naturally we as collecting institutions have to follow that content. But there's always a but. The problem is that the web is really not the web anymore. What do I mean by that? It has really changed in just phenomenal ways since what was originally conceived of, well, 25 years ago, as merely just a giant document retrieval system. And what we're really looking at now is the web as a giant distributed programming environment. The web browser has turned into a virtual machine. The language of choice is now JavaScript rather than HTML. We've made a really incredibly significant change in terms of the experiential aspect of the web. It used to be that we all saw a very common experience of a given website, and now everything is amazingly personalized. So the web that I collect is probably not the web that you were actually seeing, even if even there was a certain amount of simultaneity about those two events. While we've gone and we've tried to weather the transition from the web of documents to the web of semantic concepts, now we're looking at this other transformation to the web of things. And I certainly have no real idea about what it means to try to archive a web of things. There are a number of other issues that immediately come to mind. This is certainly not the exhaustive list. One is that crawlers don't act like browsers. The state-of-the-art way to collect the web is you deploy a farm of these robotic crawlers that go out, they look at web pages, extract links, follow the links, grab whatever they find, and keep on going. That's not exactly how people act when they are going and they are navigating the web. In particular, people can fill out forms with useful information and get things back. People can avoid getting into infinite loops of crawler traps and things of that sort. So it's really important that we're able to continually enhance the capture technology so that we have these robotic agents that are going to be able to act much more like people, so that the preserved experience more tightly couples to what an individual would have. Being responsive to very time-sensitive content. So Abby took my little anecdote that I was going to bring up about the blog post that showed up early last Thursday morning, purporting to be from Igor Strelkov, the Ukrainian separatist leader, claiming that they had shot down a Ukrainian military aircraft. That post, well, maybe not so mysteriously, that disappeared from that social media website after a couple of hours. But very fortuitously, the Internet Archive had been very, very aggressive in capturing materials related to events in the Ukraine, and actually has the before and after version of that website. So it's very important that we, in collecting institutions, take a really hard look at our collection development policies, and particularly our procedures, and figure out ways to be much more responsive to extraordinarily fast-moving events on the web, so that we're able to capture sort of history in the making, or in the remaking, as this case may have been. Web archives certainly inherit all of the problems that we're familiar with regarding the rights to collect materials, to do things with it. And in some ways, the web, there's some unique aspects to this. Many of you are probably aware that the W3C has incorporated something called the encrypted media extension, EME, into the standard definition of HTML5. Now, while EME is not a DRM per se, what it does do is it provides a standardized container in which a content owner can insert DRM mechanisms into content streams. And all that entails, which, since it is a formal DRM mechanism, that means the Millennium Copyright Act comes into play. So we need to figure out ways to be able to overcome that, or to work with content providers to collect the materials that we're interested in. It is still all too difficult to try to integrate web archives into our other traditional management and discovery services. Obviously, this has the potential to lead to highly siloed content, which makes for very difficult discovery by our user communities. And of course, we're all aware that web archives tend to be really big. And it's big in ways that introduces various stressors to archiving institutions. Certainly for storage capacity, trying to make sure that we are provisioned with appropriate capacity to deal with this can be a problem. Trying to index this material to drive effective discovery takes a lot of computing horsepower. Because of this size, we probably need to consider very strongly whether we want to deduplicate the material that we're collecting, which tends to have quite a bit of duplicative content if you are repeatedly crawling the same set of websites. And of course, you need the resources to do all that, both in terms of the technological and financial, but also in terms of staffing. Trying to find experienced staff people to work on web archiving projects is very difficult. And in fact, we're trying to hire one right now. So if you're interested, you can come see me. We've heard a lot yesterday and just a little bit earlier this afternoon about research data curation, and I think the web can play a very strong role in effective management of research data. And for some disciplines, the web itself is a primary research data object. But I think there's little awareness within the scholarly community about the role that web archives can play. Because of that, we don't have a lot of good use cases at hand. That makes it difficult for us to build appropriate tools. Also, I think another consequence of web scale is that it may tend to break the traditional sort of workflow that we're all familiar with. You find something online, you download it locally, you mess around with it on your desktop, on your server. When you're talking about gigabyte or certainly terabyte scale collections, that is no longer, may not be feasible. So I think we need to start thinking much more strongly about providing sort of programmatic access and business models to support it for in situ manipulation of web archives. Clearly, there are plenty of opportunities for technological enhancement, certainly in the area of better capture mechanisms. Quite frankly, we're just not capable today of capturing what it is our curators want to get. Social media in particular tends to be really difficult in this regard. Certainly, we also need better discovery modalities. The Wayback Machine is great if you know a URL and a date, but if you want to do keyword searching or fielded textual searching, that still is fairly difficult to do. I think there's also opportunities for collective action. Certainly, web archiving institutions should be talking to each other to try to put into place complementary collection development policies to avoid very expensive duplicative work. We should probably try to have some sort of coordinated action to support the key bits of technology that we are all using. And in fact, we may be time to consider whether we should have some sort of centralized activities to support this technology, and perhaps even the operation of web archives. Perhaps we should be thinking about a Hadi Trust-like organization where we are sort of co-locating this web material. And finally, I think there's a lot of opportunities to enlist the services of web archiving consumers, particularly with regard to selection of materials, augmenting the description of those materials, and for performing QA on captured materials. So that went by really quickly, and in many ways I had the easy job. I sort of just had to tell you about all the things that were wrong. Nothing is easier than telling you what's wrong. But don't despair, because my colleagues are now going to tell you about at least 3 ways in which you should actually be feeling optimistic about the future of web archiving. Thank you. So we'll start with Martin.
Hello, my name is Martin Klein. I'm with the Los Alamos National Laboratory, so I build Memento and nuclear bombs. However, what I would like to talk about today is a couple of Memento-based web services that the team that I'm part of has been developing over the last few months. And the team's led by Herbert van der Zompel, which I'm sure most of you will know, and Harish and Luda deserve a lot of credit for particularly the implementation work of that. But first, let me give you a little bit of motivational background. So there's extensive Memento infrastructure in place as of right now. By the way, if you don't know what Memento is, don't worry. I hope this will become clear throughout the presentation. If not, I'm happy to talk about this as well. So we have a number of natively Memento-compliant web archives in place. The Internet Archive, clearly the big player in the room, but also the UK Web Archive, the proactive archiving service like archive.today are natively Memento-compliant. So this is good news. This is great news. For those web archives that are not natively Memento-compliant, we have implemented proxy solutions, so you can also include their holdings into the Memento infrastructure, so that's also good news. We're developing an add-on, an extension for the MediaWiki systems to make them Memento compliant per se, which then would allow us to serve those holdings as well. And we have a single point of access basically for the Memento infrastructure, which we call an aggregator, that can pull all these resources from different archives together into one place. However, this is all great, but it still needs client implementations to actually make Memento surface, to get the look and feel of what Memento is all about and how it can be used. So we have an extension for the Chrome web browser that I'll demo at the end of the presentation. So if you use Chrome, if you like Chrome, I highly encourage you to go check this out. So our motivation for these web-based services now is to increase the visibility of Memento for one, and for two, its infrastructure as well, so everyone can benefit from Memento. Right. So there's 3 web-based services that we're developing. However, I will only talk about the first 2 for the sake of time, and I will give you a little encore at the end of the presentation. These 2, the first 2 web servers we're in the final stages of testing, so to speak, so they're actually not yet publicly available. I will show you screenshots of these services. So for you, this is the first time we're actually talking about those services in public, so it's kind of a sneak preview that you guys are getting, you know, the privileged view that sit in the movie theater at midnight and you're the first one to actually experience this. All right, so the first web service that I'd like to talk about is what we call the Memento Redirect service. And that's very, very simple. If you look at this URL, you probably recognize this looks fairly similar to what you see when you use the Internet Archive. You get some base URL, you get a 14-digit date time, and then you get an URL at the end there. So this is what this is. We provide the base URL, the first part, and you identify a date time to which you would like to travel back in time. The 14 digits, right? You provide the year, you provide the month, day, and the time. And you provide the original URL that you would like to travel back in time to. Right? So if you use this URL and you request it in a web browser, for example, you will be automatically redirected to the best available archival copy of that URL that you have submitted. Okay? And in this example, we're going back to, if I go back on one slide, I requested the Library of Congress website from 10 years ago, July 23rd, and I got a copy in the Internet Archive from July 22nd, so pretty good. So this service we envision is for everyone, really, for you, for me, for my maybe for my parents, and surely for every researcher that has a corpus of URIs and a date time to it. And you would like to see whether those URIs are archived, where they're archived, and when they were archived. And in addition, you can envision a system like Bipsonomy, for example, or Reddit, SiteUlike, those kind of services that see URIs being submitted to on a daily basis, including the curation datetime of those entries. So they can not only provide the link to the live version of that resource, but also using our redirect service, provide a link to the best available archive copy of that resource. So we're quite excited about that. Right. The second web-based service that I like to talk about is what we call the list service. That's basically a Memento search service. So you get an interface like this. If this reminds you of one of your favorite search engines, this might not be incidental. So you have a little form. You key in a URI. You have, and I use digitalpreservation.gov in this case. Then you have two more fields where you key in the desired date time to which you would like to travel back in time. And you have two buttons. One is time travel, and the other one says I'm feeling nostalgic, which basically means get me any archive copy of any web page that is potentially available. Okay, so I specified digitalpreservation.gov in this case, and I'd like to get the best available copy from 2012, March 17th, and I hit the time travel button, and I get a result page that looks like this. So this result page lists in this case, 4 best mementos across all archives that Memento can talk to natively. So if you have a web archive and you're not natively Memento compliant, your resources will not be listed there. If you think that is not good, please come talk to me. So in this case, we see the digitalpreservation.gov website. And it turns out that the best available archive copy of that website is from the Icelandic archive. Who would have thought? From March 17th in 2012. So I draw a little box around this particular result simply to point out that these pieces of information are now archive specific. So we see the best memento. We also see a link to the first, for example, and last memento, which means this is a link to the first ever archived copy of this URI in the Icelandic archive. We also get a link that can show us all archived copies of this URI, digitalpreservation.gov, in the Icelandic archive. And you see these little social media buttons that I'm sure you're aware of. So if you'd like to tweet about a result page, you can easily do this with this service. And of course, a little bit of promotion as well. All right, so if I click now on the top result, on the 2012-317, I'll be redirected automatically to the Icelandic archive, and the memento, the archived copy, that was the top result is being displayed, and as you can see, from March 17th in 2012. All right, another example for this list service I Googled Georgetown and I looked at the Wikipedia page and I thought, well, let's see what the Wikipedia page looked like basically 3 years ago, 2011 in July. And Wikipedia here is the only example because Wikipedia is not yet natively Memento compliant. We're working on it. However, Wikipedia is, basically so big and they have so many archived versions of their resources that this is the only example we're servicing by proxy in the service. Okay, I click on the link, and to prove to you that I'm telling the truth, this is now an old version, and you can see in this little reddish box that the version is from July 17th in 2011. Right. Then another example, quickly, we're maintaining a page that we call the hello page with 3 things to mention here. The first is, if you can see this on the bottom, the date time is left on the page when this page was last modified. It's been modified every day. In this case, on July 21st. And the 2 images that you see as well are embedded images into the page, and they are being edited on a daily basis as well individually. But those are embedded resources with a date stamp left on the image. Right? So you can see, if you can read it, Herbert in a blue t-shirt, last edited on July 19th, and Michael in a brownish jacket and a blue shirt on July 20th. So if I use the URI of this page and use our list service there and ask for a copy from 2 years ago, I get the result from our transactional archive. I click on it, and as you can see on the date stamp on the bottom of the page, the result that I get is indeed from that a date 2 years ago. However, the 2 images are not from 2 years ago. They're from yesterday or from today or a few days ago. And that's the limit of this list service, right? It works nicely for pages per se, but it does not necessarily work for embedded resources of a page. And on top of that, now I'm looking at an archived version of this page. If I would just use my mouse and do a left click on one of those links there, where would I end? Well, clearly on the live version of that resource. So this is kind of a breach in the notion of time travel, right? Not a good thing. So what can we do there? This is the encore part now. We use Memento for Chrome. Our client implementation is one way of addressing this problem. So now I go back to the page that we've seen, our hello page. And we have this little Memento icon in the right top corner of your browser once you install it in Chrome. And there I click and I can set a date time in the past. In this case now I again set the same date time of 2012, July 23rd. I click set, and now I do a right click on this page. The menu, the proper menu opens up. I can go to Memento Time Travel, and I ask the extension, the Memento for Chrome extension, to get me the copy of this page from July 23rd, 2012. And this is what I get. You already see the difference in the 2 pictures, right? Herbert is now wearing a white shirt. Michael wears the same jacket, but a dark shirt. And the date times on the images have changed to 2012, July 23rd. So this is how this can work. And if this was interesting and intriguing to you, I encourage you to go to bit.ly Memento for Chrome, download the Chrome extension. This is available now. It works. We've tested it several times. So this is there. The 2 web services that I mentioned earlier will be available in the very, very near future, certainly in the next few weeks. And once available, we should certainly share through the proper email lists and other channels. I think that wraps up my little presentation so far. And now we switch to questions later, I think, right? So yeah, thank you very much.
So I realized that the dress code is apparently jeans with blazers, except that Stephen didn't get the memo on this. Hi, so my name is Jimmy Lin. I'm from the University of Maryland. Let me start off by telling you a little bit more about myself. So I've been a faculty there, associate professor there since 2004. My area of research is natural language processing and information retrieval. So I'm a computer scientist, I'm a geek. A notable fact about me is from 2010 to 2012, I spent an extended sabbatical at Twitter, and so this is what I like to tell my colleagues. I came out of the ivory tower onto the factory floor, and for a couple of years, worked on building shit that works. And so when I was at Twitter, I worked on big data analytics infrastructure, search, recommendations, a whole bunch of other products. I had a wild ride. It was a great time there, but alas, all good things must come to an end, and I came back. And so I returned to university in 2012. And so since I've been back, I've been thinking about how I could leverage my big data experience and expertise to problems in digital preservation, cultural heritage, etc. And I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts. So the problem I've been thinking about for the last couple of years is this, what I call sort of the paradox of web archiving. So on the one hand, we can all agree that web archives are an important part of our cultural heritage. We have to keep this stuff, right? But on the other hand, they're really vastly underused. And so I've been exploring why, right? So surely, things like restrictive access regimes have something to do with it, but I think the problem is a little bit deeper. And so to me, this is sort of like a chicken and an egg problem, all right? So on the one hand, users can't do that much with web archives currently, although my colleagues are certainly fixing that. But on the other hand, it's hard to develop tools. As a computer science, as a tool builder, I look around and I want to build tools that fulfill needs. And so what are the needs? And so I think this is a chicken and egg problem. Well, to get around it, I think this is really what we need. We need these deep collaborations between users, such as archivists, journalists, historians, digital humanists on the one hand, and technologists, geeks like me and my colleagues. And so the thing I've been trying to tackle is with this goal to build tools to support exploration and discovery in web archives, right? So to think about going beyond browsing, even going beyond full text searching, and what really is the next step. And to do this, I've been focusing on the infrastructure, me being a computer scientist and a big data person. And so the two technologies I've been working with are Hadoop and HBase respectively. So if you're not already familiar with this, Hadoop is the open source implementation of Google's MapReduce framework, which is what they use for petabyte scale analysis. The open source implementation Hadoop is rapidly and widely adopted today, used in everywhere from Amazon, Yahoo, Facebook, Twitter, lots of other companies. HBase, on the other hand, is an open source implementation of Google's Bigtable, and Bigtable is what powers Gmail, Google Maps, and a whole bunch of other services. And so what I've been thinking about is how to use these open source technologies in the service of web archiving. All right. And so what my students and I have been working on for about the last year or so is something called Workbase, which is an open source platform for managing web archives built on top of Hadoop and HBase, and it's hosted on GitHub. You can just go to workbase.org and check out the repo. Okay, so let me walk you through a little bit of sort of how Workbase work. So we're explicitly setting aside the content ingestion, content gathering, and curation and the metadata process. So we simply assume that you've gathered a bunch of work files, perhaps using the IA's archive at service or something like that. You ingest it using into HBase, and you would use Hadoop MapReduce to do a lot of the analytics and processing, and on top of HBase, you would build applications that provide useful capabilities. And I'll show you a few of those sample applications that we've been working on. So I'm also often asked about the problem of scalability, and for this, my simple response is in the immortal words of the poet Jay-Z, we got 99 problems, but scalability ain't one. So with respect to Hadoop and HBase, this is sort of proven technology, open source technology that has proven itself in industry. So interesting statistic is Facebook operates Hadoop clusters over 100 or 200 petabytes and still rapidly growing, and it's able to handle and scale to those volumes. All right, and so let me, for the next few minutes, show you some of the applications and services we've built upon this infrastructure. So the first, the data set that we've been working with is a sample data set from the US Congressional Archives, and thanks to a partnership with LC on this. So it's from the 108th Congress from 2003 to 2005, about a little bit over a terabyte, so it's still relatively small, but sort of enough to get started. And our own Hadoop cluster at the University of Maryland is relatively small, so 16 nodes, but it's also enough to serve as an interesting experimental platform. Right, so the first application we can build on top of it is what I'm calling the work-based browser, which provides Wayback Machine functionality. So it's simply implemented as a Jetty service. It serves as a lightweight H-based client and reuses a lot of the Wayback code for rendering. And so you can go back and see, what Senator Clinton's website looked like in 2013. And here's an interesting one. Do you guys recognize who this is? So this is John Boehnert, who was the chair of the Committee on Education and Workforce back then. So he looked a lot younger, but just as orange. Okay, you guys get that joke. All right. So the second application, which is I think interesting, is we built upon this as a topic model explorer. And so the implementation is we take each slice of the web archive and apply topic modeling techniques on it, specifically latent diversity allocation, and then adapt a pre-existing visualization called Termite to show you and visualize for you the topics in that particular time slice. So we're able to come up with a display that looks like this. This shows the term topic distribution. And so you're able to see, for example, the terms that are most prominent across topics. You can sort of scan down the rows with topic 2 and find out, oh, that's a topic about education. You can scan down the rows in column 5 and say, oh, this must be something about national security. You see the highlighted terms down at the bottom. And so this sort of serves as a nice entry point for you to figure out, what's in the archive, what are the topics being discussed using this topic modeling technique. The final application I want to show you is the Web Graph Explorer. So the implementation is this. So we use Hadoop to do link extraction, thank you, do site level aggregation, and compute various graph statistics like PageRank, and then throw it up on interactive visualizations using the D3 visualization toolkit. And then we're able to come up with something like this. Let me walk you through this. So you can think of this as social network analysis on Congress. So the links here are formed by site linkage patterns. So there's a link between the nodes if a site links to another. Right, so you have the typical coloring scheme of Democrats in blue, Republicans in red. The House is on your left, the lighter colors, and the Senate is on your right, the darker colors. And so right off the bat, you see a very nice clustering between the House members on the one hand and the Senate members on the other hand. Oh, I should also explain the size of the node is proportional to its PageRank, and the gray nodes are committees. Right, and so this is an interactive visualization. I'm happy to show you a demo offline, but you can click on a link and say, oh, I want to explore what's that node that seems to be a bridge between them, and you can find out that this is Larry Cray. You can mouse over and find, here's the House Committee on Ways and Means, which has a lot of links to and from its members. So this kind of all makes sense. But this serves once again as an entry point into a browsing interface to let you figure out what's in your archive. All right, so to wrap things up again, I come back to this point of, in order to move forward, we need a deep collaboration, these deep integrated collaborations between users on the one hand and technologists on the other hand, and I think Workbase is a nice first step. And so one of the things I've basically done is built a nice hammer, and I'm looking for proactively partners to go out and collaborate with. So if you're interested in trying out this technology to figure out what's in your web archives, come talk to me. I'll be around. Okay, thank you.
Hello, I'm Michael Nelson, and I'm here to talk to you about some of the work we're doing in our Web Science and Digital Libraries group. We're going to talk about a lot of projects from a lot of different people, specifically talking about different ways to assess the quality of web archives. The problem is right now we're still in this phase of, hooray, it's in the web archive whenever something shows up. And what we should be asking is, how well did we archive it? So the example we're all familiar now with the Ukrainian separatists, they said, hey, we shot down a plane, and then later, oops, we didn't really do it. And we were just happy that, yay, we have it archived. You click on one of the videos, however, and it just sits here and hangs, right? So we have the page archive, but maybe not all the stuff archived that we'd like. So 3 ways that we're assessing quality of a web archive. There are many methods to do this, but the 3 that we're looking at, we want to determine the importance of what's missing. So we know most pages in the web archives don't have all their stuff, but not all of the things are created equal. The second thing we want to do is detect temporal violations, right? So if it's not missing and we include it, hooray, we have an image, but it's actually not the image that ever appeared with that original page. And the third thing is we've created a benchmark for evaluating how well the tools can handle all of the nasty problems with JavaScript and so forth that cause these violations in the first place. All right, so the first thing, we have a paper coming up in JCDL 2014 about not all mementos are created equal. So this is XKCD. I think I'm the first person to use XKCD today, so that's good. Now, on the left-hand side, we have the live web version of it. And this is kind of interesting because when this was rendered, maybe it was a transient error, it was missing a handful of resources. So the M value is just the percentage that's missing. So it's missing 17%. But using our weights, and I haven't explained how we got them yet, using our weights we figured out it's actually really low. There's a low amount of damage. Essentially what it's missing wasn't really important. In fact, you probably don't even notice that it's missing. In the middle, we synthetically took away the main image, the main cartoon. Now, intuitively, if you don't have the main cartoon, there's a lot of damage to XKCD, right? So the percentage missing is 24%, but we said, well, it's 41% damaged, right? And then on the third panel, what we did, we left the main cartoon, took away the logo at the top and the little navigation bar. The percentage missing goes up to 29%. It's still kind of damaged without the navigation bar, but the damage has gone down. So this is kind of the thing that we're trying to do, is you don't just say, well, you're missing 7 out of 100 JPEGs, so you're 93% there. We're trying to come up with weights to figure out. So for images, that's easy. Image tags and embed tags for multimedia, they often leave hints about size and centrality, where they should be placed. Turns out it's really hard for things like CSS, and CSS is often missing in web archives. So what we did is, if CSS is missing, we divide the page into these vertical thirds, and on the left-hand side, what you see is what a normal page should look like as far as the distribution of background color. So basically, each of these thirds has roughly the same percentage of background color. If you take the CSS away, on the right-hand side, you see all the content shifts to the left, and modern web pages typically aren't designed to look like this. So sometimes CSS is missing and it's not a big deal, but if it's missing and you get something ugly like on the right-hand side, which we can algorithmically determine, we say, okay, that was probably important. That was the CSS that's really going to screw up the page. And one of the reasons talking about CSS is you're probably thinking, we thought this originally, well, screw it, it's just CSS, right? All the content's there, it's just, maybe it's arranged ugly. Turns out when you show it to real users, if the CSS is missing, they think, oh, that page is really screwed up. You've done a terrible job. And what we did is we ran a Mechanical Turk experiment, and the first thing we did is showed them an undamaged page and a damaged page and made sure they could tell the difference, and most of the time they could, so that was good. And then we showed them 2 differently damaged pages of the same thing, and basically got them to come up with which one they thought was more damaged. And then we essentially adjusted our weights to match so that we agree with the Turkers more often than just the straight up percentage missing, right? Because not everything is created equal. So this is sort of a screenshot of what that looks like. So some good news. This is from the Internet Archive, going left to right through time. The blue dots are the percentage missing. You see they're holding steady, maybe even increasing. So over time, they're missing more stuff, but the red dots are slowly going down. So the stuff that we're missing is increasingly less important. So the pages are actually less damaged than they were in the past. So that's one. The second one is looking for these temporal violations. So this is an example that we like. This is a Weather Underground page for someplace in Iowa. And we see that whatever day that was, there's a light drizzle. All right. Let's take a look at some of these images. So whatever date that was, 2004, 1209, the logo in the left-hand side minus 15 hours. One of the logos is missing. Some of these thumbnails are 9 hours in the future, right? So we already have this temporal spread. The problem is we have this radar image that's 9 months in the future. And if you look, the radar image shows a clear sky, but the forecast is saying cloudy and drizzle and so forth. So it's really clear, if you look at it, that this radar image does not match the forecast. So this page never existed. You pull this back from the web archive and you get something that never existed. So how does this happen? So we have a single HTML file, and say it includes a single JPEG. And we have a timeline, and we have these changes along the way. So the correct rendering is, if I looked at the HTML file, it should pull the left-hand JPEG, the one most close to it. But we know that archives miss updates. So pretend that the correct JPEG is missing. And we go to render that page. Well, what we typically do in archives is choose the one that's closest in time. So in this case, we get one that's in the future. That's wrong, right? That combination never existed. Okay, well, don't choose the one in the future. Why would you choose one in the future, right? So choose one that's older. Well, in this case, we choose the one that's older, but that combination is wrong too. That never existed either. So what we can do is we can look for a bracket. We can build a bracket with HTTP metadata or do content comparison, but in this case, we're never going to get the right answer, right? Because the correct one is missing. So no matter how we solve that problem, we can't get the right version. So summary graph for this project, the really interesting part is 5% of the pages that we render from the Internet Archive, we can prove to contain temporal violations, right? They absolutely did not exist in the form that we're showing them. Now, think about using pages from the Internet Archive in your legal proceedings and so forth. Think about this fact and go to sleep at night. All right. The last thing, so some good news, and this is done by Matt Kelly. You can talk to him afterwards. Coming up with a benchmarks, and this is based on the acid test. So browsers back in the day trying to, they all implemented things directly. We had the acid test. This is what Chrome does on the acid test. It gets 100 out of 100. Most modern browsers do that. That's a good score. That's what it should look like. We ran a bunch of tools and various archives. We ran them against acid test, and I see my placement is messed up, but they don't quite do as well. Archive today gets a perfect score. All right, so that's for the acid test. That's for browser functionality. Matt came up with something called the archival acid test. So he set up a different set of tests for testing some of its JavaScript, but some of its HTML5 features and so forth. Run it against Chrome, everything works. Obviously, all the modern features work in Chrome. When we test it against the archives, we see that basically nobody gets a perfect score, right? So we know right away that one of the reasons why we're getting all these violations and so forth is none of the browsers, even if they have the content, they can't successfully replay all of the content that we have. So another side effect is one of the things that we test, Mummify it. It died recently, so archives don't last forever. They die at a pretty good clip as well. All right, so the future of web archiving, I'm going to claim, is increasing quantitative analysis, right? We need to stop celebrating the fact that it got archived and really ask the hard questions about how well did we archive. We need to move from, well, we're missing this many JPEGs and this many style sheets, and try and figure out if what we're missing is important. Now, obviously, if you're missing, it's hard to figure out what's important, but that's what we're working on. Even if it is present, it doesn't mean that it belongs there, right? So temporal violations are definitely a problem, and we had different categories of possibly violative and so forth. We're not even presenting that. 5% of the things we know are not correct. And then finally, to improve the quality of the archives, we actually need this benchmark, and Matt's work represents real contribution in this so that we can compare and hopefully get better tools and help head this off in the future. Thank you.
We now have an opportunity to answer any questions you might have or respond to comments. Yes, down here in the front.
So I just said some nice words, so I will skip that. This analysis of quality of damage on an archive, I think, is very interesting. But I wonder what kind of assumptions lie under this idea that you can understand what is the important thing that is missing on a website. So there is this, and how it can be then put into a computer software. So of course, this style sheet thing will work for certain kind of web pages, but for what kind of web pages will it work? Because you're kind of measuring against a certain level of utility, as I understand, of a web page. But there are web pages like, I don't know, the Nyan Cat that will be difficult to measure the utility for or something. So
there will definitely be pages for which the automated analysis are not applicable, right? And as you get into more sort of art and so forth, that'll get harder. What we're trying to do, first we came up with a set of weights, and we said, well, this probably represents what we think is a damaged web page. And then we checked it with what the Mechanical Turkers thought was a damaged web page. And then we thought, wow, how are we going to educate all these people about what a really damaged web page looks like? And then we decided, I think we're going in the wrong direction, right? We had to sort of put aside our notion of what was damaged and useful. And you saw some of the text in there, right? And so it was really about use for a purpose, right? And we said, we saved these 2 pages. Which one do you think is more useful? And basically, we're learning from what other people in mass think about the quality of the 2 pages. So at some point, we sort of threw up our hands and said, you know, to the extent that we can trust Mechanical Turkers, right? Our idea of damage is trying to reflect what other people think. Because, I mean, we're all sitting here saying we want people to use the web archive, so we have to sort of put aside our own little notions about, you know, what's damaged and not. But I agree that it will break down on these weird corner cases and so forth. But from our point, we did this so we could do a large-scale analysis, right? So you've got 1 million pages, you've got 1 million pages. Let's talk about mean damage. Let's talk about distribution of damage. And I'm sure you can pull out anecdotes where it fails. But if it works for 80, 90%, then yeah, that's great.
Michael, have you considered using adaptive rather than fixed weights by looking at, say, what are the important resource components of certain categories of web pages that may differ?
So we've thought about that, but we haven't done that. That would be a really good point, right? If you know this is a news web page or something like that, yep. And if the video is missing, so there's a huge penalty if a video is missing, right? Because if you say you have a YouTube page and the video is not there, then, you know. But some news pages, the text matches the video, so if the video is not there, maybe you haven't lost everything, you know. But that's a good point. We haven't gone that far.
Okay. Trevor.
So 2 quick questions, one for Michael, one for Jimmy. So Michael, is the idea that these would be useful in QA in the actual collecting process, so that you're comparing, say, the live, what it looks like at the moment you would be trying to collect it with what you actually collected, or is the case sort of distinct from that? And then I'll ask both questions and you guys can go for them. And then my question for you is, where you see this sort of path forward, are the interfaces that you're seeing and sort of topic modeling things that you'd imagine, say, libraries throwing on top of collections as part of the actual interface they provide, so alongside, say, Wayback or something like that? Or do you see them, I'm just curious about where you see, there's just, ultimately, it sounds like there's a whole ton of different potential points of entry that are coming out of this. And is this something that institutions are running? Is it stuff that scholars are running? Is it, you know, I'm just interested in sort of use case trajectories. So those are my 2 questions.
All right, so my question is about what are you comparing it against, right? So our viewpoint is, if you're archiving something today, you could certainly make an assessment, and if things are going badly, then maybe you could change and recrawl or target, like make sure you get CSS and things will greatly improve, right? On the other hand, if you wanted to evaluate your 2005 archives, well, there's nothing you can do about it, right? It will never be 2005 again. So, but on the other hand, if you're going to use that as the basis for your further research, right, then maybe you should have a quantitative notion about, as far as the entire archive, what was the quality of that archive, and then say, well, you know, the pages had this distribution of damage scores or something like that. You know, they were missing a lot of JPEGs, but it turns out they weren't important, right? The main stuff was there, or vice versa, right? And you know, that seems like a necessary baseline.
So about the question of the role of these tools like topic modeling and network analysis, I think it really needs to be driven from users who have substantive questions. And so in this particular use case where collaborating with political scientists that actually do want to know the evolution of doctrine, the evolution of ties, things like that. And so I think asking, is this interface useful for X, Y, and Z is sort of not a well-formed question in the abstract, right? And so sure, I mean, I can think of this as an additional way of exploring archives that can be put on top of libraries or the I or whatever, but you have to consider what are the use cases, and I think that's one of the questions that sort of I'm grappling with right now. So for a long time, my focus was on building infrastructure and building the scalable platform that could process terabytes and hopefully petabytes of data, but then they really need to move together in sync, right? The tools need to be driven by the needs, and the needs inform the development of the tools in this sort of cyclic pattern.
So I'm here. So I have a question. I was really struck by the hammer, Jimmy. Full disclosure, I'm in the faculty at the high school with Jimmy, so I guess I can ask him this question.
By the way, so
as long as you don't use that hammer on me. But so I think that well, the reality is that if you probably survey institutions with web archives, probably the heavy users would be what, 5 people, 10, with heavy technical background. But I do think that the future ought to be more like everybody can use the collection, just like any collection in an archive repository we have now, right? So I just think that if don't you think that we should do more user-based evaluation where the assumption of the user is not a highly technical person, and how do we get to that?
Yes, absolutely. I don't have an answer to that, which is why I ask you, Ricky. So I think this could be a rhetorical question that you answer yourself. But yes, I mean, yes, for this particular project, the focus of my collaboration has been on knowledgeable people that have these deep substantive questions. I think it's a little bit more challenging to try to how do you get access to the typical casual user of a web archive? I don't know. So perhaps something like log analysis on the archives that are already present might be a good start. But then it's limited by the available capabilities, right? And so this is once again getting into the chicken and egg problem. But yeah.
So this was a fantastic presentation, by the way. I'm back here. Really inspiring. I guess I have sort of a comment. You presented a hammer. As someone who uses web archives and also collects web archives, something that I'm constantly running up against is the question of want and those sort of things. And that would be, I think, my 2 cents, something really useful to the typical user.
Yes, absolutely. That actually is a research question from the information retrieval literature. The specific name is entity finding, and progress has been made about it. The problem is this, right? What you really care about is an entity in the world, and you want to find a canonical homepage, whatever the canonical homepage might be. It might be everything from a Wikipedia page to a Twitter landing page to a LinkedIn profile, whatever. But being able to think about the entity as the abstract thing that you're archiving as opposed to individual pages. And I think here is an opportunity for archivists and computer scientists and others to sort of work together. Absolutely.
I think, and in terms of access to web archiving, I think there is in comparison, if we think that we think about a live web and the purpose of using this, there's a business-driven reason to use web, live web right now. But when we archive this material into our web archives, so we're not quite clear at this point, and who will, I think somebody already mentioned, who will be using them, for what reason. So we're trying to kind of understand that the future use for that. That's kind of totally different from the current web community. So I think we've got a lot to do to find out that, understanding the purpose of have them put together, then who will be used then. So I think, just a comment to that question, but I think that made me think, and the use of the current web and the use of the web archives is totally different, maybe.
I think that's very true. I mean, we're really still very much in the early days of the use of web archives, and it's not at all clear, the myriad ways in which this material can be usefully exploited. In our case, for scholarly purposes, but more generally for a variety of purposes. We're certainly seeing quite a lot of interest in our own collections, quite heavy with regard to historians, political scientists, who are seeing this as an alternative source of news, contemporary or contemporaneous news items.
So, follow up on that. We did a study last year. It's published at JCL, and we looked at log analysis in the Internet Archive. And basically, it was, well, first it was mostly robots that were accessing things. But when you threw out the robots and identified the humans, most people were just grabbing individual pages. There was very little in a model of extended browsing like it was, 1999. Now the flip side of that is, are the tools actually influencing the use, right? Is there actually demand for extended sessions? And that's one of the things Memento is trying to do, and with the Chrome extension, is look for a tighter integration. Because right now we have this idea that you'll go spend the afternoon in the archive, right? And that, I don't think the logs bear that out. I don't think that's what people want. I think people really do want to flip between the current web and the past web, often find pages that have gone 404 or equivalent.
So my question actually is about Memento. So nice transition, thank you. Can you imagine using Memento as part of the web archiving process to capture sort of memento links of links that go outside of the space that you're archiving, so that you're linking to archives or potential archives of pages, such that you're not, in addition, maybe even for things that are shortened, right? So if you have a bit.ly URL, if you could convert that into the real URL, but really the Memento version of the real URL of the day that you archived whatever you grabbed, then you might start getting something that was a little more durable when you go back to look at it in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's several aspects to that question. The first is a generic statement that shortened URIs are really evil. So despite the fact that I put it on my slide, do as I say, not as I do. But right, and I think a scenario where bit.ly disappears all of a sudden, well then a lot of the Twitterverse is gone. We have no way of matching A to B again. So trying to more proactively interact with the notion of generating URIs and also archiving URIs at the same point, and publishing both the link basically to the live version of the web and a link into the archive of the archive version of that resource would certainly be beneficial. However, it's we have to be careful that we know that archives disappear. Mummify is gone. Web Citation was in danger last year and is now back up, it seems, for a while anyways. Maybe Memento disappears at some point, right? So we need to be agnostic not only towards archives but also towards technologies, and be careful that we don't create another silo and put ourselves in another corner and just create one problem, remove one problem by creating another.
You can reconstruct pages and get a great deal more completeness by using Memento to search across the 15 or so public archives that you can gain access to. There's this this weird aspect though, if I reconstruct a page and I pull from 15 different archives to reconstruct that page, then actually the stability goes down, because when I go back to that page and hit reload tomorrow, those archives, surely somebody's going to be down and so forth. So we can actually increase the completeness, but actually potentially lose some stability by actually pulling from multiple archives. So this actually suggests that we need to archive the specific archival rendering that we saw at a particular time, and you know, so it's like job security all the way through. So.
Over here.
Question over here.
I have a question that may try to combine at least two of the presentations, perhaps all three. You know, Jimmy, I was struck by one of the first things you wanted to do in terms of doing a kind of data analysis of your data set was topic modeling, which is a very kind of text-based kind of analysis. And then Michael goes up there and exposes the potential downfalls of doing something beyond text analysis, that if you want to do something that combines the visual and the textual, or just the visual, you could be running into some very kind of sticky issues. And so I'm wondering, from a preservation standpoint, how do we think about archiving these data sets to open up visualizations, to open up use scenarios that are beyond just textual, beyond just capturing the news, capturing the media. As a kind of corollary, I'm wondering if any of you wanted to comment on some of the commercial ways of trying to archive the web. I'm thinking of, for example, Pocket. I noticed that they have a premium service that says you can archive the websites you want to archive, and we will preserve it forever and ever. And whether that kind of commercial intrusion is beneficial or perhaps muddying the waters a little bit for the efforts that you guys are proposing.
So maybe on the last aspect of that, in general, I would probably support the point, the more the merrier in terms of web archiving. We've seen, again, that even archives are in danger of disappearing, and what happens to holding. Mummify, as far as I know, tried something very similar. You got, I don't know, 10 mummies for free, and everything else they charge you, I don't know, a monthly rate or something like that. It didn't work out. So I don't think a lot of people have actually found a viable business model to do web archiving. But nevertheless, we learned yesterday that big data is sexy, so you can actually be pretty sexy by dealing within an archive. However, something like Memento, whether it's Memento or something else, enables you to be really, really sexy by by using more than just in an archive. So it's the more the better. Could be irresistible.
I mean, we certainly think that it's important that the Academy is able to keep and maintain effective control certainly over its own content of all sorts, not just web archiving. So I mean, always have a jaundiced eye when people start talking about commercial alternatives. Certainly, any claim of forever, you need to take that with a great grain of salt, even when we make it. But at least we represent very long-lived institutions that have hundreds of years track record of managing these important intellectual assets.
So for me, the focus on text is simply searching under the lamppost. So I'm a text processing information retrieval person, so that's my natural instinct. But yes, you're absolutely right. There is a lot of value in the media, videos, images, etc. that are also captured, but they're just a lot harder to work with. And they're also a lot bigger, and so that increases the processing requirements needed. Right, so analyzing text pages is one thing, but to analyze individual frames in YouTube videos or something along those lines requires even more processing horsepower.
Used the word news, and somebody out there used the word media, and as someone who has actually been vetted media, I have to caution people as to what the word has been torqued to be today. And you're doing an awful lot of archiving, but of home. And anything you're saving by someone who doesn't take time to go to the old-fashioned thing called a book to vet details oftentimes becomes broken telephone. So I'm very concerned as to how the future is going to be rewritten by people that are very impassioned, opinionated, and aren't real media, didn't have editors and never cracked a book and went to, for example, a Wikipedia. And I only out of deference to the gentleman from the Missouri School of Journalism, I really think that everybody here needs to visit the journalist creed that school was founded upon. And I will tell you, I lived through 2008 when members of the press club were freaking out because entities were shuttering daily, and they would set up blogs, and then anything that got them a hit is where they followed. So definitely look at the journalist creed. A little thing about Dianne Feinstein and her definition of media. I did paper trails that took me to Germany and other countries that sell credentials that got people into parties they had no right being anywhere near the dignitaries, but it was a fake pass that let them be part of a moment or the rave. So there are real journalists, but not in the way that it's oftentimes misinterpreted. You have to question and push back on someone that uses that term.
I mean, certainly the collections that we're responsible for. I mean, there are curators behind all of those things, and they are making the normal sorts of curatorial and collection development decisions as they would for any other types of materials. And in our system, they also have an opportunity to provide certain surrounding intellectual context in which the web archive material is presented. I can't say that all of them take advantage of that to the fullest, but there are opportunities to put cautionary statements if that in fact seems to be useful or necessary. Yeah, I think you would raises some interesting questions about who would be doing that evaluation and what their credentials were to make that type of a decision. I mean, certainly in the libraries, we try to get out of the arena of making qualitative assessments. We don't consider that to be really within our purview. Are we out of? Okay. I guess we're out of time now, so please join me in thanking my colleagues for some really interesting talks.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.